Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn the Gemara Masechta Shabbos on Daf Hey Amud Aleph and Daf Hey Amud Beis. Let's begin. So here in the Gemara, we're going to present three things from Rabbi Yechanan regarding the Akira and the Hanacha. Amar Rav Oven, Amar Rav Eloi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Rav Oven said in the name of Rav Eloi, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, if a person threw an item 4 amas from Rishus Harabim and another person caught it, the din is as follows. Amad b'mkeim evekibel, if he stayed in his place and caught it chayiv, then the thrower is chayiv, since he did the whole malacha of throwing 4 amas from Rishus Harabim. Akar b'mkeim evekibel, if the person left his place to catch it, putter, then the thrower is putter, since the thrower only did the akira and that it moved 4 amas from Rishus Harabim, but the hanacha is attributed to the person who caught it. Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned a brayso that says the same thing. Acherim say, if one threw an item 4 amas from Rishus Harabim and another caught it, Amad b'mkeim evekibel, if he stayed in his place and caught it chayiv, then the thrower is chayiv. Akar b'mkeim evekibel, if he left his place to catch it, putter, then the thrower is putter. And now the Gemara presents a question that Rabbi Yechanan asked regarding this din. Bayi Rabbi Yechanan asked, Zarek chayfetz, if somebody threw an item, v'nekar humim kaimein, he himself left his place, v'chazer v'kiblei, and then he went to catch it. Mahu, what's the din? So the case is if somebody threw an item 4 amas from Rishus Harabim, but it didn't land where it would have landed, rather he ran after it and caught it before it landed. What's the din over there? Before the Gemara answers that question, the Gemara asks a question on this question. My kami baile, what's the question? And like Rashi explains, of course he's chayiv. He did the whole malacha. He did the akira. He made it go for 4 amas, and then he did the hanacha. Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Adabar Ava. Rav Adabar Ava said, Shnei koiches ba'adam echad. When there's 2 koiches and one person kami baile, that's what he's asking about. When one person didn't do the malacha with 1 koyach, but rather he separated it into 2 forces. What's the question? Shnei koiches ba'adam echad ka'adam echadami. Do we say that 2 forces and one person is looked at as one person, v'chayiv and he's chayiv? He did the whole malacha. He did the akira. He made it go 4 amas and Rishus Harabim, and he did the hanacha. He did the entire malacha. He's going to be chayiv. Or maybe kishnei b'nei adam dami. We look at it as if it's 2 people who putter and he's putter. Just like when a person threw the item 4 amas and somebody else went and caught it, they're each putter. The reason is because his akira didn't have its hanacha, rather it had a different hanacha. The person who did the hanacha didn't have the akira. We can say the same thing by one person. When he threw it 4 amas, the hanacha of that akira didn't end up happening because it would have landed in one place. Instead, he ran after it and made it land someplace else. So the akira doesn't have a hanacha, and the hanacha didn't have connected to it directly its own akira, and therefore we look at it separately, and each thing on its own is not chayiv, so the person is not chayiv. Answers the Gemara, Teku, let it stand. The question is unresolved whether the person is chayiv or not. Now we move on to the next thing from Rabbi Yechanan. Amar Rav Oven, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Here's from Oven, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Hichnis yadei l'seichat tzar chaveri. If somebody extended his hand into his fellow's yard, so he's in Rishus Harabim, and he extended his hand into Rishus Hayachid, the kibel makes jamim, and he received rainwater. He caught rainwater in his hand. V'haitz, and he took it out. Chayiv is chayiv. So asked the Gemara, Maskif lo Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera asked, Mali hitine chaveri. What's it to me if his fellow loaded it into him or placed it into him? Mali hitine shamayim. What's it to me if the heavens placed it into his hand? Just like if his fellow placed it in his hand and he took it out, he's putter. Since his fellow did the akira and he didn't, he's missing the akira, so he's putter. So the same should be when the heavens placed it in his hand. The rainwater fell from the heaven into his hand. He should also be putter. What's the difference? In both cases, he didn't do the akira. He didn't do an akira, he shouldn't be chayiv. Answers the Gemara, don't read that he was makabel, that he received the rainwater, rather kolat, that he collected it. In other words, he hit it with one hand into the other, so there is an akira, he hit it. So that was the akira into the hand, and then he has the hitzah and the hanacha. Ask the Gemara that although he has an akira, there's a different problem. We need an akira from a place that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. We don't have it. The way we understood it is that he hit it in the ear. The ear is not an area of 4 by 4 tefachim. Rabbi Chia Berei Ravuna answered, it's referring to when he hit it off the wall into his hand, and the wall that it was coming down was 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. Al Gabi Kaisel Nami, says the Gemara, even on the wall it doesn't help. It's not resting. So we explained that he had the akira. And we explained that the akira was from a wall that was 4 by 4 tefachim, but it needs to be resting on the wall. It's not resting on the wall, it's just running down the wall. And says the Gemara, we could say, like Rava said, B'kaisel Mashupa, that it's referring to a slanted wall, a sloping wall. Hachanami, just like Rava said it there, Hachanami here too, B'kaisel Mashupa, it's talking about a sloping wall, and therefore it's considered at rest. So before the Gemara goes on to discuss whether this is a good answer, the Gemara now goes to a side discussion, which is, we said, it's like Rava said elsewhere. Where did Rava say this? Ask the Gemara, Ve'hecha itmer de Rava, and where was this of Rava taught? Ha'adetanan, on this that we learned in a Mishnah, If somebody was reading from a sefer on a doorstep, and the doorstep was considered a carmelis, as the Gemara explains over there, since it was 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, and it was higher than 3 tvachim high and lower than 10 tvachim. So he was reading from a sefer, and in those days the sefer was like a Megillah. Then his galgal sefer miyadeh, and the Megillah rolled out of his hand, so half of it rolled into the Rosh Hashanah, and half of it, the other end is in his hand. The din is goylei etzlei. We allow him to bring it back, and the reason is since half part of it is in his hand and part of the other is in the Rosh Hashanah, so it's really not a problem. The question is, did the Rabbanan make it usher? So the din is that they did not make it usher, since the whole Isser over here is only an Isser with the Rabbanan, being that he's in a Carmelis to Rosh Hashanah. So since the whole issue is a Carmelis to Rosh Hashanah, so therefore the Rabbanan didn't say that since half is out and half is in, he has to leave it. Rather, they permitted him to bring it. But if he was reading on top of the roof, which is a Rosh Hashanah, it's not a Carmelis, it's a Rosh Hashanah, in his galgal sefer miyadeh, and it rolled out of his hand, so he has one end and the other end is out of his hand into the Rosh Hashanah. So actually, if it didn't get reached 10 tefachim, goylei etzlei, you bring it back, because the Rosh Hashanah only extends up to 10 tefachim. But once already reached within 10 tefachim, what he does is he turns it over so the writing should be underneath for derech eretz to the sefer, and he has to leave it there. And the reason is, since from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah is minatera, the Rabbanan made a gzera that they did not permit him to bring it back, even though he has one end and only one end is over there. And we asked about this. Why does he have to turn it upside down? It never rested. Why can't he just bring it back? It's not an issue that it's in Rosh Hashanah. It's hanging over the Rosh Hashanah. And Rava said, because it's a sloping wall. So regarding that, Rava introduced this idea of a sloping wall where it comes to rest. So too by us we'll say he hit it from a sloping wall, and therefore since he hit it, he has an akira. And since it's a wall, therefore it's 4 by 4 tefachim, and since it's sloping, it's resting. Says the Gemara, Eimer, the Omar Rava, the Gemara rejects this answer. Say that Rava said this by a sefer, since it's solid, the Ovid Denayach, so therefore it's not a liquid. It could be that it could rest on a sloping wall. Mayim, but orders mi avidi denayach, does it happen that they could rest? They're not resting, they're just flowing down the wall. Elam, Rava said a different answer entirely. When Rabbi Yechanan said if he extended his hand into Rosh Hashanah and brought out water, he's chayiv. It's referring to that he took water out of a little pit, a little hole that it was in. Ask the Gemara, Guma Pshito, then of course he's chayiv. Rava doesn't need to teach it to us. Of course, if somebody carries from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, he's going to be chayiv. And says the Gemara, no, that's the case. And the Chiddush is, Mahu D'Tema, what would we say? You might have said, Mayim al Gabe Mayim Loy Lav Hanochahi, since he took the water from the pit, but he didn't take all the water, there was still some water remaining. So one would say that it's not considered that it was resting, since its water floats on water. So one would say that it's not considered a proper anacha, and therefore, since it wasn't resting in the Rosh Hashanah, he's not chayiv. Kamash Malon comes to teach us that it is considered resting. So water is considered resting, and the reason is because we don't say that there's no top water and the lower water. The lower water is resting and the top water is not. Rather, the water is looked at as one entity, and it's all resting in the area that it's in. Va'az the Rava Latame, the Gemara continues, it's in purple because he's just completing this idea. And Rava goes according to his reasoning. The Amar Rava for Rava said, Mayim al gabe mayim hainu anachasam. Water on water, that's considered resting. That's the state of water. Egez al gabe mayim lav hainu anachasam. But a nut on water is not considered its way of resting. And therefore, if a person took some water from a pit and brought it out to Rosh Hashanah, he's chayiv, since it's all resting in the pit. But if he took out a nut that was floating on the water to the Rosh Hashanah, then he's not chayiv because the nut was not resting, it was floating. Now, since we brought up this discussion of water on water resting and a nut on water not resting, we present a side discussion in this topic. Bayi Rava asked, Ego is bikli vikli tzaf al gabe mayim. If there's a nut in the kli, in a container, and the container is on top of water, what do we say if the person carried the nut out to the Rosh Hashanah? Basar ego is as linon? Do we say we just look at the nut? V'hanayich, and it's resting. It's resting in the container, which is, let's say, 4 by 4 tefachim. So since it's at rest, he carries out his chayiv. Or maybe basar kli as linon. We follow the kli. The nut might be resting in the kli, but the kli itself is not at rest. V'halayich, it's not resting the nayid because it's moving, it's floating. The Gemara answers, Teiku, it's left unresolved. Let the question stand. So we presented this side discussion whether a nut in a kli, which is on water, do we look at the nut and say it's resting, or the kli and say it's not? And we said, Teiku, let the question stand. Now the Gemara continues with this discussion of things that are resting on other items. Shemen shetzaf al gabe yayin, if oil is floating on top of wine, and Rashi says it's also referring to water. We just mentioned wine. We'll see in a moment why, because it's This was brought up in the context of truma, and wine is given to truma as well as oil. So oil that's on top of wine or on top of water, machlekes Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri v'Rabbanan. It's a machlekes between Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says if one carried out the oil, he's chayiv, and the Rabbanan said the Rabbanan will say that he's not chayiv. Where do we see that they argue about this? The Tanan, it says in a Mishnah, shemen shetzaf al gabe yayin, wine that was floating on top of wine, oil that was floating on top of wine. V'nagat tful yem b'shemen, and at tful yem somebody whose tummy touched the oil. Loi pasal ala shemen bilvad. The Rabbanan say he only made pasal the oil because the oil and the wine are separated. The oil floats on the wine; they're separated, and therefore the oil becomes tummy and not the wine. So we see that the Rabbanan hold that we look at them as distinct entities. It'll come out that the wine is resting in the area that it's in, but the oil is considered to be floating. So therefore, if somebody carried it out, he won't be chayiv since it's floating. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says Shnei mechubarim zelazeh. They're attached to one another. We look at them as one entity of liquid, and therefore, if the oil became pasul and tummy, it all became pasul. And the same thing for Shabbos. We look at them as attached as one entity, and they're all resting in the container. Now we move on to the third and final teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rab Avin, Amar Rabbi Loi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Hayaton oichlun umashkin. If somebody was loaded, he was carrying food and drink on his shoulder and his hands. V'nichnas v'yetze kolayim kulei. He's going in and out the whole day. Einei chayev ad sheyamed. He's not chayev till he stands. And Rashi explains what this is referring to. It's referring to an individual that picked up items and he intended to put them in a different corner. And then he changed his mind and decided he's going to take them out to the Rosh Hashanah. So if he took them out to the Rosh Hashanah, he's not chayev. The reason is because when he originally did the akira, it wasn't with the intention of doing a malacha. When he originally did the akira, it was with the intention of doing something mutter. He's going to carry it to a different corner in the house, which is allowed. So therefore, he's not chayiv because he has to have the intention of doing the malacha. He has to have that kavanah when he begins the malacha. And therefore, even if he's going in and out the whole day, he's not going to be chayiv until he stops, and then he starts a new action with the intention of doing a malacha, and he completes the malacha. Amar Abaya. So that's the teaching from Rabbi Yochanan. Now Abaya qualifies this teaching. Amar Abaya. Abaya said, "V'husha amad lofish." It only consider that it's starting a new malacha, a new action. Not just if he stops, he has to stop to rest. However, if he just stopped because he wanted to adjust the items that he was holding, it's not considered that he's starting a new action. Says the Gemara, Mimai, where do we know this from? So the Gemara is supporting what Abaye just said, that's why it's in purple. Mida Omar Mar, from this that Rabbah said, Mar, it refers to Rabbah, the teacher of Abaye, that he was talking about a case where an individual carried 4 amas and Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbah says that if he toich dal amas, but if he stopped in the middle of those 4 amas, so if lofish, if he stopped to rest, potter, then he's potter. Because although he carried 4 amas, but since he stopped, let's say after 2 amas, he stopped to rest, it's considered that he's separated into 2 acts of carrying, one of 2 amas and another of 2 amas. So he's not chayev. Lekativ chayev, but if he only stopped to adjust the items, then he's chayev, because that's not considered a real stop. So already from there we see that a real stop is only if the person stops to rest, but not if he stops to adjust. But we're going to quote the whole teaching of Rabbah. If the person walked the 4 amas and then stood, so if lafa, here it's the opposite. If he stopped to rest, chayev, he's chayev, because that's considered a real stop, so he completed the malacha. Lekatif, but if he just stopped to adjust the items, potter, he's potter, since it's not considered that he stopped, the full stop and a real stop, so the carrying of dal amas does not yet have a hanacha. So that's the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan and the qualification of Abaya, that it's only Amad Lofish, and the support to what Abaya said. Now the Gemara is going to ask a question. My Kamash Malon, what is he teaching us over here, Rabbi Yochanan? That the akira at the beginning wasn't for this purpose, and therefore he's pater, because the first akira was for something that was mutter. Is that what Rabbi Yochanan is teaching us? That's a problem, because Rabbi Yochanan already taught this once. So it can't be this is what he's teaching us here. Now the Gemara is going to be in purple, because we're going to show where he taught it. The Amar of Safra, Amar of Ami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We learned Rav Safra said in the name of Rav Ami, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, one who's carrying items from one corner to another corner of the house, and he changed his mind about them. He decided, I'm not going to put it in another corner, I'm going to take it outside. And he took it out. Pater is pater. Because it wasn't an akira from the very beginning for this purpose. And you need to have that akira for the purpose of a malacha. So Rabbi Yochanan already taught it once. So it can't be that this is what he's teaching us here. Answers the Gemara, it is what he's teaching us here. And Amarei Ninu, these are 2 Amarei. Rabbi Yochanan taught it once. And then we have Rav Omvin Amar Rabbi Loi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and we have Rav Safra Amar Rabbi Ami Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Mar Amar La Bahai Lishna, one said it in this lashon, he gave over the teaching in one way. Umar Amar La Bahai Lishna, and the other master said it in a different lashon. So it comes out that the teaching is one and the same. Rabbi Yochanan only said it once. The reason why we have two of them is because each Amira gave it over in his lashon with his words. So to summarize the Gemara, we basically have three discussions from Rabbi Yechanan about Akira and Hanocha. The first is, if the person separated the Akira and Hanocha, what's the din? And we said Teku. The second is, if a person carries water from Rosh Hashanah into Rosh Hashanah, although the water was floating on water, he's still chayiv. And then we had a discussion about items that are floating on other items or resting on other items, but not properly at rest. And the third and final one is that a person needs to have the kavanah to do the malacha veitzah at the beginning in order for him to be chayiv. And we mentioned that it was taught twice, just because each Amir has taught it over in his lashon.